Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, a way too early discussion surrounding what Michigan needs to do in that spring transfer portal window. And look, a lot of this conversation is going to be shaped on what we see and what we hear coming out of spring practice. But there are certainly some positions that I think all Michigan fans look at with this depth chart and say, yeah, we still have question marks about it heading into 2025. Want to get into, kind of some of those positions. And I think this episode does two different things. One, it allows us to talk about where this depth chart sits right now and what we need to address, but it also, kind of highlights and allows us to talk about some of the biggest storylines that we as Michigan fans have going into spring practice as well. It's an early conversation, but y'all know I'm a Michigan fan. This is kind of how I spend my whole day, is just thinking about this Michigan football team and say, hey, how do we get better heading into 2025? To the Michigan fans, let it fly in the comment section. There are a few positions that I think are obvious, but I think there are also some positions that are kind of sneaky needs as well. Would love to hear from you guys, to the Michigan fans. The amount of support y'all have shown the boys has been amazing. Very busy last couple of weeks and really last couple of months for this Michigan program. I've had a blast talking about it. Can't thank you guys enough for the support. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. The biggest thing I think for all Michigan fans is we're going into spring practice with that quarterback position checked. This is exactly how you want it to see, right? Bryce Underwood coming in, we think is going to be the guy in 2025 with a grizzled veteran in Mikey Keene. And shout out Jaden Davis for sticking around and just kind of, for lack of better terms, trusting the process with Michigan. Running back position loaded. I don't even know if you could get a running back to come to this Michigan program, because you look at Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall, that to me has the ability and the potential to be one of the best running back duos that we see in the country. I don't know if a lot of Michigan fans would have thought this, but 12 months ago, we were really confident about Kalel Mullings and Donovan Edwards and what that running back duo would be in 2024. I think it's going to be better in 2025 with Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall. Getting to what I would think is by far the biggest need for Michigan going into 2025, by far the biggest question mark we have on this roster, and that is the wide receiver position in it. I'll be the first one to admit it was a little bit surprising with how aggressive Michigan has seemed on the recruiting trail and in the transfer portal at certain positions that never really seemed to have a ton of aggression adding wide receivers to this roster. When I think for a lot of Michigan fans, we look at the wide receiver and say, there's not a ton of proven difference makers in this room. And I think project number one going into 2025 was, how can we build an offense around Bryce that, allows Bryce Underwood to have immediate success in 2025. I think you have the run game to do so, but you look at the pass catchers, to me, it does seem like there's still some wood that needs to be chopped. Now, I think Michigan's maybe strategy, if you will, in terms of how they want to go about it is, hey, let's look at what it looks like in spring practice. Let's see what Fred Moore looks like, or let's see what Samaj Morgan, let's see what Andrew Marsh looks like. Let's see what these young cats look like with better quarterback play in spring practice. Because the very well could just be, hey, Fred Moore, Samaj Morgan, good wide receivers that just didn't have an opportunity to be successful because of the lack of quarterback play. That might be the strategy here. But as it sits right now, I don't think you have a true wide receiver one. And I don't think you have a legitimate proven difference maker in the pass catcher room, especially with Colston Loveland moving on to the NFL. This to me continues to be the biggest hole in Michigan's roster. Where might Michigan go in the spring transfer portal window? One thing that I've been playing around with, and I'm kind of interested to hear what the Michigan fans think of this, is it does seem like this Michigan pass catcher room lacks top end speed. And I think you saw that in 2024. Like, who were the guys that were legitimate threats in the deeper third? Guys that safeties, cornerbacks had to respect in terms of long speed down the field. There just was not that guy. It seems like a relatively slow wide receiver room. one name that I think would be interesting for Michigan to maybe just look at in that spring transfer portal window. And again, this conversation is like these guys haven't hit the spring transfer portal window. We're just kind of playing around with some names and type of wide receivers. Jalen Brown. Michigan fans remember Michigan going after him in that 2023 class. A guy that ran a 10.6 in the 100-meter dash coming out of high school, went to LSU, was behind Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, decided to transfer to Florida State, wasn't all that productive at Florida State. Florida State had the same problem Michigan had, and that was just really, really bad quarterback play and didn't really give the wide receivers a ton of opportunity to make some things happen. I don't think Jalen Brown is a legitimate wide receiver one, but I do think he provides some of that long vertical speed that Michigan, for lack of better terms, seems to be lacking in the wide receiver room. Another name that I continue to look at is Nitro Tuggle, who announced he was going to hit the transfer portal, then decided to go back to Georgia. I could see Georgia losing some wide receivers in the spring transfer portal. They bring in a Noah Thomas, they bring in Zachariah Branch. They have a bunch of young, talented wide receivers, and I don't know if I have a ton of confidence in the passing game. Who's Georgia's wide receiver going to be or quarterback play going to be going into 2025? There are more questions than answers around this Georgia offense than we're used to seeing, which I think could lead to some attrition for Georgia in that spring transfer portal window. And Nitro Tuggle, 6'1", 200 pounds, track and field background. Michigan went after him out of the high school ranks. There's potential for Nitro Tuggle to be a legitimate wide receiver one in this Michigan offense. Now, he's not necessarily a proven commodity yet, but I do think he has all the traits that you look for into kind of an elite pass catcher that Michigan could use in 2025. That to me is by far, and I think a lot of Michigan fans would agree, is the biggest question mark we have going into 2025. I will say this. Would I have liked to see Michigan get aggressive for a wide receiver in the winter transfer portal window? A top end one. And it's not a shot at Donovan McCulley. It's not a shot at Anthony Simpson, guys that I think can be very good football players for Michigan. Are they legitimate wide receiver ones? No, probably not. Would I have liked to seen them go after one? Yeah, absolutely. I thought there were a lot of good wide receivers in the portal. I don't hate the process of, hey, let's, instead of getting into these bidding wars for these wide receivers, let's see what we have within our roster going into spring. And if we do think we need to add another one following spring practice, then we can go be competitive. But giving the opportunity to guys like Fred Moore or a guy like Samaj Morgan or a guy like Shannon Goodwin, Kendrick Bell, even freshman Andrew Marsh, giving them the opportunity to kind of show what they can do in spring practice before we start bringing in a ton of wide receivers. I understand the thought process for Sherrone Moore there. The other position that I look at is offensive tackle. It's not a glaring need because I've been very vocal that I think Evan Link, Andrew Sprague, that those are two guys that, one, played really good in that bowl game against Alabama, are only going to be getting better going into 2025. Two young offensive tackles. I think the question for me is, one, the depth behind the offensive tackles. You look at Evan Lincoln, Andrew Sprague, the projected starters. All right, Brady Norton's an FCS guy going into year 3, kind of question marks there. Blake Frazier, we know, probably needs another year development. Andrew Babaloa and Ty Haywood, true freshmen that we like, but true freshmen nonetheless. Would it make sense for Michigan to go after an experienced offensive tackle and add them into the mix? Yeah, I think it probably would. And a guy that, again, we'll see if he hits the portal again or not, is Phil Famo. I loved his tape at Washington State. Obviously, Michigan, I think, finished, kind of second in his recruitment out of the transfer portal before going to Wake Forest. Look, I'm not saying it needs to be this name, but this kind of offensive tackle would make a lot of sense. A plug and play right tackle that allows Evan Lincoln, Andrew Sprague to compete for that starting left tackle job heading into 2025. And look, there's a very real chance that Evan Lincoln and Andrew Sprague look really good in spring practice, get a lot better, and we don't have that many question marks about tackle. I wouldn't mind bringing one in for kind of two reasons. One, there's not a ton of experience in that tackle room. You're talking about two red shirts. You could pull up the depth chart again. Talking about two redshirt sophomores and a guy and Brady Norton and Evan Link. You're talking about two redshirt freshmen in Andrew Sprague and Blake Frazier, and you're talking about two true freshmen in Andrew Babelow and Ty Haywood. I mean, the oldest tackle in this room as we sit right now is going into the third year of college football. I love the young pipeline, but you probably have some question marks about the experience and depth of the position, and that's a position that you want to be deep in going into 2025. Outside of that, I like the inside of the offensive line. Love the running back room. Really like the tight end room. Wide receiver priority one for me. Biggest question mark we have in spring, and then the offensive tackle spot is probably two. Going to the defensive side of the football, I'm a huge fan of what Michigan did, not only in the spring transfer portal or the winter transfer portal window, but also player retention. I mean, retaining TJ Guy, retaining Derek Moore, retaining a guy like Rayshon Benny, that you wouldn't be able to find many better defensive linemen in the transfer portal. So just go retain what you have on your roster. Then you bring in Devon Payne and Trey Williams. I look at the depth and talent of the defensive line and say it's way deeper. Like how does Michigan's defensive line get better going into 2025? Losing someone like Kenneth Grant, losing someone like Mason Graham, I would argue that the depth could be a reason we get better there. Linebacker room is really good. The only question mark I think a lot of Michigan fans have is at that cornerback spot where Jair, and it's a very similar conversation to what we had with the tackle position, and that is we like the young talent, Zeke Berry, Jair Hill, Josiah Edmonds, Shamar Earls coming in as a true freshman. Love all those names, especially you look at the boundary cornerback spot if Zeke Berry goes back to nickel and say, well, our oldest player here that we trust is Jair Hill. And I don't hate Caleb Anderson, but he's not a guy that I'm penciling in as a starter for Michigan. Would you want to maybe go grab a guy that's played a lot and has a little bit more experience? I look at someone like Jaden Lucas from Clemson, former five-star, that has all the traits to be a legitimate cornerback, one who has at times struggled to stay healthy. uh, That one could make a lot of sense too. And I'm not saying Michigan needs to get a cornerback, but I am saying that, the one, the depth, and two, the experience could be a little bit of concern for this Michigan program going into 2025. To me, Michigan checks a lot of boxes. They check more box. I mean, when you check the quarterback box, you feel way better about where Michigan is in 2025. There's a lot of boxes checked. You look at the spring transfer portal window, and that's I mean, for lack of better terms, your last opportunity to make put the cherry on top of your roster heading into 2025. It's such a blessing for programs to go out of spring practice, come out of spring practice and say, hey, we have one more opportunity to maybe fill in the cracks of our roster before 2025, where, 5-10 years ago, you go through spring practice, you got question marks about your roster, you better figure it out with the guys that you have on your team. You have that opportunity to maybe answer those last lingering questions about your depth chart. Michigan doesn't need to bring in 10 guys in the spring transfer portal window. I don't even think you'd want to. But taking a look at a few positions in your roster and saying, hey, where can we fill in those last cracks? I think those positions to me are the spots that you're looking at. We'll see what Michigan likes or decides to do. Obviously, it's going to be very contingent on what the spring practice looks like. And for Michigan fans, like, this spring practice session is going to be so fun. Obviously, Bryce Underwood kind of headlines it, but you got a lot of different position battles. You got a lot of young talent coming into this program. You got a lot of transfer portal additions as well. A lot of moving parts, a lot of exciting storylines for Michigan heading into that spring practice window. And that will kind of formulate the rest of our conversation of, hey, where does Michigan need to go next? We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.